All right, well, I am showing that it is high noon here in Colorado, so we will go ahead and get started with our session today. So welcome to the confluence of business and career services and the community navigating the waters. And my name is Christine Krieger, and I'm the professional development consultant for the Colorado State Library. Just a couple housekeeping items as we start today. We're going to ask that you stay muted during the actual presentation, but do feel free to ask questions in the chat as we go along, and I will help keep an eye on that. Also, feel free to have your video on or off as you see fit and works well with the bandwidth that you have for internet. And then also, I just wanted to let you know that we do have a captioner for today, so you should be able to, I believe it's in the lower kind of right-ish area, you should be able to turn the CC button on if you need captions for today. And I think that's pretty much all I have. So I'm going to turn it over to our presenters today, Christine and Sandy.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Christine Dyer, and I am currently the adult nonfiction selection librarian for Arapahoe Library District. But prior to that, I did have a career as the career services librarian.
And hi, my name is Sandy Hancock. Currently, I'm the Director of Adult Education for the Pikes Peak Library District. Previously, though, I was the Strategic Services Business Librarian for the district.
And if we could go to the next slide, please. And one more. Thank you. All right, so let's talk a little bit about why we are here today. Business and career services are available from a lot of different types of organizations and in a lot of different formats, and libraries are just one of the places that provide those. Libraries can be instrumental in forming partnerships and collaborations with other types of information organizations to serve the differing needs of our diverse populations. A lot of different organizations do provide similar or complementary services, and part of what we'll talk about today is how to leverage those types of collaborations and partnerships. We'll be talking about a number of the different types of sources that are available both for career and business services. But to start out with, first, we have to know what our own goals are and what our strategy is. What is our own organization looking to provide to our community? What do we want to accomplish? And how can we find and work with other organizations to achieve those particular goals? And these goals may look a little bit different depending on what your organization is. And we'll be talking about that a little bit later too. So today we are going to go over strategic plans, talk some about creating goals, talk about working with local organizations, identifying community partners, and a big one is talking about collaboration without creating competition. There are enough folks who need business and career services to go around for all of us, so it doesn't have to be a competitive environment. And then Sandy and I will have a little bit of time for some questions too. And next slide, please.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about strategic plans. So most organizations have their own strategic plan, and they're going to be different where you are, and depending on the size of your library, how you are set up, and there are just many different functions for a strategic plan. One of the things that I found really helpful and useful for me when I was the business librarian was to take the strategic plan that we had at the time and work the goals and values and mission of that strategic plan into a plan for the business services. That way the services and outreaches that I went to and the people who I met and the events that we would plan were based on my organization's plan, and it helped to guide where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do, and the collaborations and the partnerships that were going to be available to me to create for PPLD. So, like I said, your different organizations are going to have different plans. Pull out the parts that will help you to guide you in business or career services, knowing that your function is specific, you're a subject matter expert in this, and the people who you're going to go out and reach are going to be different from sometimes other parts of your organization. Another thing to remember about strategic plans is they're fluid. Sometimes they change. Mine changed several times in the course of the time that I was there. So just go with the flow, read the trends, find out what the rest of the library is doing. And like in my case, they actually did change the strategic plan before I left. So I had to change actually some of my verbiage and, some of my marketing material. Next slide, please. This is an example of what PPLD's vision, mission, and values look like. So we wanted to provide resources and opportunities to lead thriving people in connected communities. So I kind of changed that to, resource and opportunity to help entrepreneurs and small business owners. The values are always important to think about, which values are important to your organization, so you can pull those into your business services and make sure that you're doing what your values say. And then, the mission statement kind of followed along with that too. So next slide, please. So my strategic services, Christine, mission was to provide resources and spaces that build community. And we do that by providing equitable access and resources and information for entrepreneurs and small business owners in our community. So this is a plan that I used when I started to continue to grow the business services for our district. I did set up a 5-year plan, and based on that 5-year plan, I set out, goals that I wanted to meet during that time. It helped me to think about short-term goals that I could accomplish right away, and then others that were larger and ways that I would have to, bring in other people to get to these goals. One of the things that I did do while I was working on this was I did find a mentor through an ALA business group, and she was the business manager for the library in Richland, Virginia, I believe. So it was really helpful also to reach out to other people who are doing the same thing, may have more experience or a different point of view. So always look for those people who are out there. One of the things that she did was she went through this plan with me. So you'll see where she listed her comments in green. If we could go to the next slide, please. So like goal 1 that I had was to reconnect with the community to provide services that are relevant to the community needs and focus on the business community. So when I stepped into this role, it was during COVID, and a lot of the relationships were gone, basically, through COVID. So part of what my goal was after we started to reopen and everything was to reestablish those connections with people in the community. And I looked at what my strategic focus was. I figured out what my outcomes were going to be or what I wanted them to be. I did list benefits because sometimes you do get asked about what you're doing and why you're doing it. So it's always good to have information that's listed there. And then I worked on a timeline and a plan to go through. and start to connect and do the actions that I needed to fulfill that timeline and plan. If we could go to the next slide. This is just another example of some of my other goals. So again, because of coming out of COVID, frontline staff, many who were hired during COVID, didn't know everything that I did. So part of that was to go in and reintroduce actually our services to our staff too, so they knew who to go to. And then collaboration was always a big thing too. So internally and externally to provide opportunities for the community to understand, and then also to advocate for the library. So not only was I out there talking about business services, but also library services as well. And then if we could go to the next slide, please.
Okay, so this is the 5-year plan that I created for Arapahoe Library District Career Services. And when you look at Sandy's plan and my plan, no, they don't look exactly the same. And one of the great things about creating one of these plans is that you can create it to suit your organization. Maybe your particular organization has a certain format that they would like you to use, but you will know that Sandy and I have some similar types of goals as far as collaborating both internally and externally, and also kind of reintroducing the subject matter to staff. So the way that I set up my particular 5-year plan is I wanted to look at, again, Arapahoe Library District's vision. So a literate, informed, and fulfilled community. And then also what our mission is, dedicated to being the best public library for the communities we serve, providing service to everyone seeking access to information and ideas. Now, every year we have different strategic plan objectives. So my idea for this was to list those for each year. And, you know, in the future, I don't know what they are, but, you know, for 2022, I had the strategic plan objectives and I could incorporate that into my plan. At the top of my plan, the first year baseline was that I was recreating the career services platform at ALD. And so each year going forward, I would center my goals and services around the district strategic plan objectives. One thing that Sandy had mentioned about finding a mentor was really a good thing for her to do. And I did something similar. My supervisor at the time actually had the career services librarian position a few years before I did. So very familiar with, you know, what we had done in the past, where we wanted to go. And so, you know, having her go over this plan with me was super useful. One thing that I set up was looking at my key collaborators. So within the district, there are some very natural collaborations there. So our business services librarian, language services librarians, and then librarians who reach out to different communities that could benefit from career services. So again, language services, older adults, teen services, and then, of course, collaboration with marketing and communications as far as getting, you know, flyers out, doing things like that. Sandy had mentioned that when the strategic plan for PPLD changed, you know, she had to do some updating on materials. So, you know, keeping track of those things. And then another collaborator within collection, or excuse me, within the library district is collection management. As far as community collaborators, AdWorks, which is Arapahoe Douglas County Works, their workforce center in Arapahoe and Douglas County, the ARC of Arapahoe and Douglas County, and then various school districts as well, because part of my strategic plan was to really start reaching out to teens. So my first goal overall, build effective outreach to the Arapahoe County job-seeking community. And then goal 2, collaborate with staff to ensure that they have the resources that they need to assist our patrons. And I started this position in the summer of 2021. So still, you know, kind of still in COVID, trying to come out of it. So I had some of the same challenges that Sandy had mentioned as far as getting back out into the community, letting them know that we're there, that we want to collaborate. And then also letting staff know what our services are. And also with the huge amount of staff turnover that we had during that period, retraining is necessary for a lot of folks. So for year one of my plan, the strategic objectives were remote library services, which again was kind of fed in by COVID. Those remote services became very important. Equity, service to patrons, and innovation. So one thing that I was working on was creating an ongoing outreach plan. So for older adults, I worked with our older adult services and business services, and we presented a 3-part series on business and career services for older adults. I also presented a number of times at AdWorks Generations at Work program, which is a large program that they have with a lot of different types of classes and guest speakers for seniors who are looking for work. And then with teens, I presented at the Colorado Teen Literature Conference, and I did a class on Adulting 101 Career Resources for Teens. So that was exciting as well. And then also presenting at high schools to let them know how the library can assist them in some of their first searches for work, whether that's resumes or interviews, whatever they're looking at. Also, an objective was to create core career services classes and workshops and test drive them. So I did a 3-part series during the first half of the year: resumes and cover letters, job search, and getting to know your future employer, which is basically showing patrons all the different types of research they can do about the company that they are applying for. And then the 3rd trimester of 2022 was resume and cover letter workshop and linking in with LinkedIn. And I want to go back for a second to something Sandy said about these plans being fluid. Things change all the time. The strategic plan for your whole district could change. You could go through a reorg. Those happen, as we know, in libraries all the time. That may change everything about how your department works. And, through these changes, what I found was that some of that 3-part series just were not that popular. So that is why I moved from doing all 3 of those classes to resume and cover letter workshop. And I found out that LinkedIn was something a lot of folks were interested in. So I did classes on LinkedIn. And then, of course, connecting with patrons via one-on-one sessions at all of our different branches. This is a super popular format at my library for patrons. They would rather do a one-on-one session than attend a class in most cases, is what I have found. So next slide, please. All right. And then a second aspect of year one of this plan is collaborating with ALD staff. So I collaborated with business services, language services, and outside organizations to present our education and career fair. And this was geared toward a local immigrant population. In Centennial, Colorado, where in Arapahoe County, where Arapahoe Library District is located, we do have a very large immigrant population. And so we collaborated with outside organizations to come in and talk about jobs that they had available, anything else that might be useful, educational opportunities, and also our ESL program was part of that collaboration too. And then I was also working on collaborating with teen services to look at providing more robust volunteer opportunities for teens. During COVID, of course, summer reading looked a lot different. We didn't have volunteers for that. And our regular teen volunteer program also was not in engagement at that time. And from what I understand, they're hopefully going to get that going, I think, next summer. And we do have some branches who did use teen volunteers for this year's summer reading. Also, it was necessary for me to provide yearly training for ALD staff on career services resource and meet with staff on a regular basis. One of the most useful things I found was attending branch staff meetings where I have kind of a large group of staff at one time, and I can talk about what career services is working on and answer questions. And then, of course, collaborating with collection management to make sure we have career development materials. And in my current job as nonfiction selection librarian, that is something I do now. I select the career development materials. For my second year, which is 2023, when I created this plan, I didn't have what the year's strategic plan objectives were, but my goal was to add to my outreach plan. And I think this is something important to look at, is look at what kind of outreach you're doing. If that is one of the goals of your district, part of your vision, part of your strategy, and see where you can build on that. So I had been working on outreach with older adults and teens, so moving into military veterans, patrons with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and of course our immigrant population. And then evaluate those core classes I'd been teaching and adjust based on attendance and feedback, which, as I'd mentioned, I'd already started doing at the end of the year. Continue to connect with patrons. I also was scheduled to attend the National Career Development Association conference and present at it this year before I took the job that I'm currently in. And that's an important thing too, is to look at the different types of places that you can present at and the different types of organizations you can get involved in to learn what other people are doing. And then of course, collaboration with Arapahoe staff. So again, business librarian, language services, teen services, and collection management. Next slide, please. And then as we move into years 3, 4, and 5, you can see that they have less and less information as we go forward, because I don't know what's going to happen at that time. For year 3, goal was to maintain the ongoing outreach and again, evaluate core classes and present at the National Career Development Association conference. Year 4 was going to be a big evaluation year. So is career services providing what patrons need, and also starting to evaluate whether career services can encompass an educational aspect too, which is something that my supervisor and I talked a lot about. Were there education opportunities that we could start looking at too, as far as providing education services in addition to career? And then year 5, update services as indicated by previous year's evaluation. So you can see that Sandy and I had some similar types of information in our 5-year plans. We both had goals, strategies, the different collaborations that we were working on. But again, these are just examples of what you could create for your own 5-year plan. All right, could we go to the next slide, please?
Yeah, so just to review for the strategic plans, celebrate your achievements. When you reach a goal or a milestone, that's great. One of my goals was to get an entrepreneur in residence, and I was able to do that for 1 year, and that was just an amazing experience and was really beneficial. Unfortunately, due to budget cuts and reorganizations, we weren't able to bring it back this past year, but it's things like that that help to keep you going and to look at the future and think about where you're going. I think it's also good to share your plan with people and get feedback. That was really important to me. Even just like when Christine and I were, comparing our plans, and then again, working with the mentor that I had, it was really good to get these different set of eyes on what I was doing. And there were some things that she told me, she's like, that's just not realistic, take it back and think about where you could put that into the future. Or, that's a really big plan. Let's, create some smaller bite-sized chunks to get through this. Or, that's too small. Let's make it bigger. So it's good to get those different opinions and work from there. Teammates, if you have other people who are in your department doing the same thing, their ideas also can feed into that. Remember that these plans are flexible. Life changes, things change, organizations change. Just be willing to change with it. And I think most importantly is look for collaborators everywhere. I mean, you'll and we'll touch on this a little bit later, but you find people in the oddest places sometimes that can really help you out in your service or your career. So next slide, please.
And just real quick, touching on what Sandy said, I also wanted to note in the chat that Christine had said the process would work for any library service, not just business services. So that's something to think about too, that doing these plans, the way that setting up goals and looking at these types of plans can work with any type of library service. And I would encourage people, no matter what service you're in, to take a look at creating one of these plans. It really made me think about what I wanted to achieve. And Sandy had mentioned having her mentor look at it and say, okay, this is too much to accomplish, like right now. And that's something I had to think about, was resizing the things I had in my plan. And so you'll notice that in 1 year, I have a manageable chunk. Maybe I'm going to try some things out, and the next year we evaluate them and move on from there. So definitely keep it flexible and make sure that you are changing things as they need to change. And remember that you're one person and you can't do everything. I think that's one of the big things to think about. All right, so moving on then, we're going to do a little exercise here. So let's talk a little bit about vision and goals. So there's short-term goals, long-term goals. What can you build now? And what is your strategic plan? And Sandy and I have shown you, a few examples of those ideas, what some of our short and long-term goals are. What could we do immediately? And what is the overall plan? What is a logical and doable starting point? You have to have a place to start. And it can be overwhelming thinking about what you want to do with services within your community. So you just need to start, just getting down on paper some places to begin. So what we're going to do is give you all about maybe 5 minutes to write down some ideas. What are some goals? What can you start with now? What could wait? And what are you looking to accomplish? What are you thinking about for your strategic plan? So I'll go ahead and we'll take about 5 minutes. See, it's on my clock, it's 12:27. So we'll come back in about 5 minutes. So I'll just mute myself and we'll let everyone have a chance to share out. Right, so let's go ahead and come back here. And those of you who are attendees, what did you come up with? Did you come up with anything as far as goals or what you could start with?
And feel free to unmute yourself if you had something that you wanted to share, or you could type it in the chat, either way.
I'm happy to share because I just was doing something along these lines and realized I wished I had done this first. So it was kind of an easy realization. And I think I wish that I had first, if I'd had more time, assessed the local environment and what was already available, and done some of that partnering work that you mentioned earlier. I feel like that's really for me would have been the number one useful thing to start with, just because not only would it reduce any kind of competition, but it could boost what we're doing through the collaboration, or through at least them knowing that they can point people towards us. We do have some local business organizations and things that do some similar work in this area. And as we delve into it kind of for the first time, we don't want to step on their toes. And we also want to be able to build on some of the audience that they've already connected with. So that would have been the first chunk I would have bitten off if I'd had a little more time.
Well, that's really great. And you bring up good points about, collaboration and competition and kind of, building off of an audience that maybe they already have. So we are going to talk about that in just a few minutes, because that is always a concern, I think, is that we aren't here to create a competitive environment. We all have the same goal as far as helping our patrons. And anybody else have anything that they would like to share? Well, then we'll go ahead and let's move on then in our presentation. If I could have the next slide, please. So let's start talking a little bit about working with local organizations. So what services do different types of organizations provide? Public libraries provide databases, one-on-one appointments with business and career services librarians, LibGuides, and classes. And for those of you who may not be familiar, LibGuides are online guides that have a lot of detailed information, links, lots of different types of things where people can go to learn about a particular subject. So there might be a business LibGuide, maybe a career LibGuide. We also have workforce centers, which are the folks that I worked a lot with as career services librarian. These are employment resources and counselors. They have hiring events, unemployment resources, career path assistance, and job fairs. I will say that attending job fairs was a really useful thing for me as a librarian. I definitely got to meet a lot of people and talk about the resources that I could provide. So it definitely was a really great opportunity. There's all kinds of different types of opportunities that you can attend. And then also business incubators. So resources for entrepreneurs and small business owners. And this could include workspace, mentorship, and just providing expertise as well. And if we could go on to the next slide, please.
We talked a little bit about Christine talked about types of organizations that are out there. So just start jotting down or shouting out or in the chat, what are some of the organizations that do similar things to what you do? And think outside the box for this, because sometimes, again, you find collaborators that you didn't think you even knew. And some of the people who I establish relationships. I was a branch manager prior to being the business librarian. I was able to utilize some of those relationships. And actually now in the position that I'm in with adult education, some of the business relationships that I had built are helping me out on some other things. So, you know, I think sometimes we want to just focus on just someone else who does exactly what we do, but there's a lot of overlap in the community and also in the library too. So does anyone want to, oh yeah, Amir, yes, housing, homeless services organizations, small business organizations, chambers of commerce, yes. Other local business organizations. Amir, are you a business librarian? Assistant director? Yeah, so you get to really think about all sorts of different community organizations that are out there to help you in the whole library. Yeah, schools can be really useful. We have several universities and colleges around that have business schools and business teachers, instructors. So, you know, that is helpful. But also showing them our resources, I think, was also really valuable to some people because not everybody in our community has the same resources.
I have found from a career resources perspective, you know, high schools oftentimes, sadly these days, you know, libraries are really struggling in school districts. And sometimes they're being shut down, materials are being taken out. It's just a lot of it's financial, and this is a really good opportunity for public libraries to partner with high schools and really provide our resources. And from a job perspective, we can provide them access to our databases for job searches and for writing resumes and just lots of different types of things that they can work on. And that's one thing my district is definitely doing, is working on building partnerships with the local school districts so that they do have access to everything we have while they are struggling financially to provide resources. Another thing that came up in the chat, your Chamber of Commerce or other local business organizations, going to Chamber of Commerce meetings is great. You can meet so many people there, and there's a lot of different types of Chamber of Commerce meetings too. So different groups, so you can attend those and really meet a large variety of people.
Let's go to the next slide. So these are some of the organizations that I think both of us had talked about as far as community partners. So, for the business community, there are a lot of ALA groups, the libraries as Launchpads is a big one. It's a group of libraries that started out, they all received these huge grants from Google to do innovative business services. So they've come up with some really innovative ideas on business services and different things that you can do. And you can join that group and just get an idea of what they're doing. And they all are very open to questions if you have to ask them. Let's see. And classes, again, going to the small business development centers in your area. I worked closely with them, providing marketing information. PPLD has a database called Data Axle, which is just a huge resource for people trying to create marketing lists or looking at your competition. So that's really, that was a really good collaboration. We also have SCORE, which is another business entrepreneur help organization. It's made up of retired entrepreneurs, and we would go and present there. 1 Million Cups is a huge entrepreneurial organization, and they have weekly meetings, and we would go and talk to them. And again, like we were talking about schools, the cities, your city may have an economic development center as well. Here in Colorado Springs, our Colorado Springs Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development Center has been a really good collaboration. And that's one of the things that's really starting to happen in the Pikes Peak region that hadn't always been there, but a lot of these organizations that are actually in this group here get together bi-monthly to talk about what each one of their services provides to people. And as we do that, we see how we can share our resources. We have databases, they have experts. SBDC has some lawyers who are consultants, so you can set up a one-on-one with an attorney if you had those types of legal business questions. So it is important, like once you start to identify these organizations, is to then reach out and start introducing yourself and going to their meetings if you can, and telling them. I had a postcard that had all of the resources that we had available for small business owners and entrepreneurs, and I could hand that out. And it was just really great that people could see that we have these services to provide, but I was also gathering information on what they provided as well. And one of the things that I continue to learn as we create this, calling it the business ecosystem, is that we don't need to compete. A lot of times it's collaboration. People come to the library for certain things. People will go to the SBDC for certain things. People go to 1 Million Cups for other things. And even though some of our services are duplicated, a lot of times people feel more comfortable going to one place or another. People trust libraries in a way that they don't trust organizations. So a lot of times those are the patrons who I found would come in and I would work with them. Some people are still more comfortable maybe going to SCORE or SBDC, but sometimes they'll still come over and want help with using a database. So I think people find where they want to fit in, but we support each other. And by knowing what other resources are out there, we can always point people to them. And, and those organizations, knowing what we do as a library, will point people to us. So it's worked out really well that we've all got together. And I think one of the things that's really helpful if you're in a position where you could do this with community leaders is to get them together and bring them to the table and discuss it. Because a lot of times that doesn't happen because no one wants to take the onus of responsibility to create these groups. But again, if you have the resources to do that, that's a great way to bring everybody together to sit down and talk about what you do and share your resources and learn what they do. So were any of these a surprise to anyone, or it was all basically stuff that you had thought of already?
And I just wanted to mention, there's one on there, the Cal BSIG is actually, it's an interest group, a business interest group for the Colorado Association of Libraries. And so I know we have a couple people from out of state, but you might go back to your library association, see if they have any business interest groups or something like that, or maybe it's something that you could start on your own.
And I also wanted to address a little bit too. We have ALA and PLA on here too. Those are great organizations to join, attend conferences, and collaborate with people who are in similar types of libraries or learn from people who are in other types of libraries. We'd also listed on here the Colorado Career Development Association. So your state may have its own career development association. Great place to join and network. I will say in 2021, we were still meeting virtually, which was a little challenging, but now that things are getting back to some in-person meetings, that's super useful. There's the National Career Development Association, which is just really great for libraries. They actually don't have a ton of library members. And so that was kind of exciting for me to be one of the folks to come in there from libraries and talk about what we do and learn about what they do. And Sandy had mentioned too, referrals are huge within the business and career community. We're always referring people to other organizations, and they're always referring people to us in libraries. And Sandy, can you talk a little bit about libraries as launch pads?
Yeah, so Libraries as Launch Pads is a group out of New Mexico, and they provide, I was getting my Libraries as Launch Pads and Libraries Build Business confused. Libraries Build Business is the Google grant group. Libraries as Launch Pads is a group that was started out of New Mexico, and they have a certification, so you can go through their classes and become, it's a certificate in entrepreneurial librarianship. It's always a mouthful. So I went through that, and that was, I really liked that because the cohort that I was in had librarians and directors from across the US. So we could talk about how things were working in our different communities, but also a really great place to get some ideas for business services that other people were doing. And we had also rural libraries and bigger library districts. So it was interesting to look at the different ways services could be provided at those two different sizes of libraries. But yes, if you shoot your email in the link, I can send you information about both of those groups. They're both really good.
Well, let's go ahead and then move on to the next slide. And we have talked some about ways to collaborate, but just to touch on a few topics here, will there be duplication? Yes, but that's okay. There are plenty of people to go around. And as Sandy had mentioned, people have varying degrees of comfort with varying types of organizations. Libraries generally are very trusted, so people do like to come to us, but maybe someone is more comfortable at the Workforce Center or with SCORE or something maybe very specific to the type of business that they are looking to create. So we definitely do all of those types of referrals, and they send people back to us as well. Promoting partnerships is really important too, and that's something that can be done on, a higher level too within your district. Maybe it'll be a larger partnership between the library and other types of organizations, and also sharing their resources on your pages. So LibGuides, blog posts, those are always useful, and I have found that people are generally very willing to share my information on their websites too. I had a lot of places, workforce centers, various other types of career services who are willing to share my information. So definitely reach out and just ask people if they can share your information. I've never had anybody tell me no, and I certainly am happy to do it with their information too.
Yeah, and it is good for some of these places to share your information. We PPLD has a nice business LibGuide, and that was something that we could share with the different organizations out there. So that was helpful, but I also shared, again, their information in this LibGuide too. So the information was freely available to anybody who wanted to look for it.
If we could go on to the next slide, please. And we talked a little bit, collaborating and competing, and we don't want to create competition. Services can complement each other. Different types of organizations have different hours, they have different staff, and they have different expertise. Libraries are often open later hours than a lot of the workforce centers and a lot of other types of organizations. So that's useful for folks who maybe are working and need to come in later. So that can be helpful. Maybe a workforce center has a very specific staff position that people want to talk to. So that might be a good fit for some folks, but there's a lot of different ways that we can complement each other. Workforce centers generally do have more staff dedicated to business and career services. At my district, I was the only career librarian, and we also had a business librarian. There's just two of us. So workforce centers do have more staff, and they may have more capacity to handle more folks on a daily basis as far as one-on-one appointments go, simply because in a library, you may have other responsibilities too. So you may not be able to devote your whole day to those appointments. Business and entrepreneur incubators will have people who have actually started their own business. So they have the specific expertise. They can talk to people about creating a business plan and financing and all the other types of things that they need to think about before they start their business because they have been through it themselves. And then SBDC has counseling and training for small businesses, including working with the SBA to develop and provide tools to support business startups and existing business expansion. And if we could go to our next slide, please. And are there any questions? That is basically the end of our presentation. So does anybody have any questions?
And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. So feel free to unmute or use the chat area if you have questions for Sandy or Christine. And while folks are thinking, I will also mention that The archive will hopefully be available on Libraries Learn tomorrow. Everybody who registered for the session, I will email you directly with an archive or a link to the archive. I will also post a PDF of the slides because I know there was a lot of information that they shared, especially about how they did their strategic plans, which I think could be useful for people trying to parse that information out. And then you'll also get a survey from me where you can share what you thought about today's session.
And the last slide of our presentation does have my contact and Sandy's contact information on it. Sorry, Christine, I should have said. So when Christine puts out the PDF of the presentation, you'll have access to that as well.
And feel free to email me with any questions, or Christine. We'll more than happy to share
absolutely
our information.
Any other thoughts or questions for today?
I want to thank you all for taking time out of your day.
Thank you.
Yes. So I'm not seeing anything else come through. So once again, the archive will be sent out to everybody. I want to thank everybody who attended today. We know how busy libraries are right now, so we appreciate your time and attention. And then I really want to thank both Sandy and Christine for sharing so much really great information about strategic planning and partnerships and all of the other sort of things that they have thought through as they were working in business and career services. So thank you guys for agreeing to do this webinar with me today.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I am going to wish everybody a really great afternoon, and once again, look for the resources in your email.